Okay, so this recording will be a audio one because it's kind of lengthy, just like the other ones. And I wanted to ensure that we focus on a lot of the content within the actual um, lecture. So, welcome to part two and three. I combined them together. It's just to make sure that you didn't have like six PowerPoint lectures since you already have a total of three. This is all about the SEM motto and guidelines and using it. And I hope that, from the reading you found it really useful. I thought it was a pretty interesting motto. I never heard of it before, so I'm excited to talk about it with you. So, really quickly, the school-wide enrichment model is a focus on student strengths and on interests while attempting to engage the skill development of gifted students, gifted and talented students. So, the SEM promotes engagement through the use of three types of enrichment experiences that are enjoyable, challenging, and interest-based. Separate studies on SEM have demonstrated its effectiveness in schools with widely differing socioeconomic levels and program organization patterns. I'm not sure people have conducted studies on the model as of recently. These two studies are relatively old. However, it does show previously this model was effective. I'd be curious to see, and maybe I'll come back to this on my own time, but I'd be curious to see who has effectively used this model in the last, I'm going to say 5 years or so, because of the way that gifted education has changed so much and how it has been integrated into pretty much inclusive settings without much support. Because I feel like a lot of you have stated, gifted education is not seen as a high priority and often in schools, especially if students who were identified no longer are identified as gifted. So it makes it a little bit, I think, harder to ascertain any research regarding the school-wide enrichment model because of the decreased amount of interest, and not interest necessarily for practitioners, but interest for us researchers and measuring the effectiveness of models that support gifted students. So, continuing on, this theoretical model has two goals. The first goal is to developing academic giftedness and then also creative productivity, which we've seen a little bit of, but we haven't seen a lot of in regards to the other models that I've discussed. They've kind of split things in half, but not combined them. So the first is that giftedness is not a unitary concept. I love the fact that they stated this, but there are many manifestations of gifts and talents, and therefore single definitions cannot adequately explain this multifaceted phenomenon. So I think that's one of the challenges with research and also preparing students who are gifted. Because there is no one definition for what it means to be gifted and also what demonstrates gifted and talented abilities, because it ranges in area and also in ability range. In other words, creative productive giftedness enables children to work on issues in areas of study that have personal relevance to the student and can be escalated to appropriately challenging levels of investigative activity. So they focus more on the student's ability to demonstrate their giftedness as opposed to identifying one definition that suffices the the picture in your head that represents giftedness. So there's a three-ring conception of giftedness that this model adheres to. It states that interaction among three basic clusters of human traits exists, and that includes above average ability, high levels of task commitment, and high levels of creativity. So these are just some key highlights from the readings that I pulled out. I'm not going to go over every single point, but I wanted to make sure that you honed in on those three characteristics that they identify. This model originally generated from the Triad model by Renzulli, which they created an app for measuring and tracking and also following the progress of gifted students. So the triad model had 3 parts to it: general exploratory activities, group training activities, second level, and then the individual and group investigation of real problems. So from this model, this original model, grew what you see today as the school-wide enrichment model, which I thought was pretty interesting. I like the idea of focusing on student strengths and interests as opposed to just the preliminary things that may identify them as gifted. And just a heads up, this model has been around for a very long time. So if you don't know anything about gifted education, you're interested in kind of expanding your current skills as an educator into this area, you may want to look into it, because it seems like it has influenced a lot of what we see today in regards to how people have decided to plan and implement best approaches for gifted education in inclusive settings. Okay, so continuing on. This model has 3 major goals that are designed to challenge and meet the needs of high potential, high ability, and gifted students, and at the same time provide challenging learning experience for all students. So I think it's interesting that it was created in the mindset that gifted students will be a part of your class. However, how they're a part of your class means that I'm not only supplying enrichment for one group of students, but I'm trying to elevate my entire class while meeting the needs of this special population of students. So I thought that was really cool to make sure you remembered, and also kind of just to keep in mind that it's a combination of those 3 rings: above average ability, creativity, and then a task commitment, that then produce the enrichment model that can benefit not just one group, but the entire group at the same time. And it is a school-wide thing, so I know that for some of you, you're like, I can't do this at my school. But I do think that the way in which to measure and track the effectiveness of the strategies that are being used to increase the gifted ability, or develop the gifted ability, can be used in any setting and without school-wide support, although that would be nice. So goal 1, to maintain and expand a continuum of special services that will challenge students with demonstrated superior performance or the potential for superior performance in any and all aspects of the school and extracurricular program. So the key point is to not stifle their gifts, but expand them. And I like this little picture here because it's like, you really want, I would like to do this, gifted, and then creative. So they kind of combine it all in one to ensure that the student is developing while surpassing their gifted abilities to a superior performance level, as opposed to what we see sometimes now, which is that they get a deduced amount of rigor that does not enable them to elevate their skills at any level. Sometimes they even lose some of their gifted abilities because they get used to dumbing it down or watering their skills. The next goal is to infuse into the general education program a broad range of activities for high-end learning that will change all students or challenge all students to perform at advanced levels, and allow teachers to determine which students should be given extended opportunities, resources, and encouragement in particular areas where superior interest and performance are demonstrated. So I thought this was a key thing with this goal that can transcend through any particular problem, because this is kind of your answer to differentiated instruction. If it's already set in the model that you have a broad range of activities that enable students to perform at their highest end or at their current standard, it enables you to flawlessly differentiate instruction without the need to overplan or kind of develop a whole entire new curriculum for the students, because it's embedded in everything that everyone does. So, for example, you already have the range of novels that you're going to teach the students, or the range of skills that you have set for that math section in the curriculum, or the science teacher is continuing that conversation with associating vocabulary and aspects from the math and English lesson, and everyone's projecting this model of advancement and options for students. It's all about options. With this possibility, everyone benefits. Everyone's able to reach the highest level that they're able to, because you have the differing levels of abilities integrated into the curriculum model for the year, or for the entire school, which is why I like this model. And then the last goal is to preserve and protect the positions of gifted education specialists and any other specialized personnel necessary for carrying out these goals. So one of the cool things is that this model does stress and also prioritize the abilities of educators and specialists who can project the talents of gifted students to the superior level that they can go to. But it's integrated into the natural flow of the school. So it's not like, oh, you just get pulled out. No, everyone's getting opportunities to strengthen their skills, not necessarily in the same way, but the opportunities presented to them. And maybe since, as a class, the gifted student shows an interest in a certain area, they will then go to the gifted specialist, education specialist, and then work on that skill a little bit more. So it's a school effort in ensuring that while you have your high achiever and your creative learner, you're also meeting the needs of the gifted learner at the same time. The way in which you're meeting the needs is through the service delivery components of the model. So you have 3 ways that they emphasize in how you would deliver these options: talent, the total talent portfolio, curriculum modification and differentiation, which we will talk about in the next. We'll talk about those 2 in the next few lectures, which talk about compacting curriculum, which is super cool. And then enrichment learning and teaching, which is another component which all schools may not, buy into, but these 2 here are ones that can be easily done, and I would say integrated into any education setting, even without the whole school buying in. So there are also suggested resources within this model and non-negotiables, which we'll get into next. There's a school-wide enrichment team, professional staff development model. You know how every year, I don't know if you've had this experience, but every year at the schools I've taught for, they always ask for new committees and ideas. This would be a committee for you to create, the school-wide enrichment team. And this will be the plan to follow, because honestly, enrichment should be something that the whole school's talking about, but a parent may not come in and say to you, my student has been labeled as gifted, and they may actually ask you to not mention that because of prior experiences. So you still need to prepare for the idea that you have a gifted student in your class or a talented student in your class that will need enrichment. How should that look for you as a school, for you as a class, for you as a grade level? And that's what the school-wide enrichment team could be, ideally. And then professional staff development model overall, everyone gets development on learning how to best meet the needs of gifted students, and then the curricular materials and resources. They also recommended the school-wide enrichment teaching specialists, which I thought was pretty cool. I like the online Renzulli learning system, and then the parent orientation training and involvement. I think we do not use our parents enough, because some of that enrichment, some of that mentality of aiming higher or being your best starts in the home environment. So including them in the process is super important. If you are part of a school that does have a parent involvement club or parent involvement group, you might want to consider joining it. And then a democratic school management plan. You can go back and look at those within a reading, but I just wanted to highlight the implementation resources that they suggest. And then lastly, the non-negotiables I thought were super important to pay attention, because there is a such thing as implementing a model incorrectly. Which I have seen done by myself a few times and others. So I just wanted to kind of draw our attention to focusing in on what do they mean by non-negotiables, and also what we can do to ensure that we're actually implementing the model correctly. So if your school did decide to integrate a SEM model, obviously they would probably have some professional development over the summer or over a period of time where you all kind of invested in reading and researching, and then you will implement it the following year. But here are some non-negotiables. Number one, non-negotiable. It says the first non-negotiable is that anyone who tries to implement an SEM program has read our book entitled The School-Wide Enrichment Model, a comprehensive plan for educational excellence. A thorough knowledge of goals and components is essential. So it's just like the classroom management book that they give to all teachers and the Teach Like a Champion book. It's a model that you have to learn to integrate. It's not just something that you can just pick up and say, hey, I'm going to do this. So if you are interested in the SEM model, I do encourage you to pick up the book that they suggest to make sure you have a very thorough understanding of the entire model. Now, the the service delivery components that I mentioned, you can read on those and implement those separately. But if you're trying to integrate the entire model as a school and you're the leader of your curriculum development area within your grade level, or you're like a really close to the assistant principal, or you are in a position of leadership coaching and you're considering this model, please make sure everyone's reading the book. Okay, non-negotiable 2, although we have advanced a larger talent pool than traditionally has been the practice in gifted education and the talented pool that includes students who gain interest on both test and non-test criteria, we firmly maintain that concentration of services necessary for the development of high-level potentials cannot take place without identifying and documenting individual student abilities. So documentation and also data that shows, that this student is gifted is important. Also, I put here, all information should be used to make individual programming. So there should be documentation. There should be some type of testing that you have in regards to discussing students' abilities so that you can actually target and document what you're doing in a very systematic way. That's why they recommend a total talent portfolio, which helps students identify their abilities and interests while pairing it with the learning style. So it's an intentional way of ensuring that gifted students' needs are being met and their abilities are being developed. It's not just something that's coincidence. Non-negotiable 3, enrichment specialists, also known as gifted education teachers, must devote a majority of their time to working directly with the talent pool students, and this time mainly should be devoted to facilitating individual and small group investigations. So say, for example, I have identified your group of talented and gifted students. Then it will be up for your school to ensure that you had a specialist that then they can rotate to a couple times out of the week. I know that one of you mentioned that 5 of your students goes to a pullout for the GATE program. Well, in order for that to take place, obviously your school would have had to identify gifted students and their abilities, and then have a specialist on hand that would ensure that their gifts are developed and nurtured and also expanded. So one of the key things about this model is that you need to have kind of everything in place, and this is hard for a school that doesn't have the resources to employ an enrichment specialist. So I'm not sure exactly how it might work best if you wanted to do it as a school, but it would mean that you would need to either prepare a teacher who's currently employed to be a specialist or bring one on board. And then non-negotiable 4, that SEM programs must have specialized trained personnel who work directly with talented pool students to teach advanced courses and to coordinate enrichment services in cooperation with a school-wide enrichment team. So every state typically has some type of GATE program, enrichment program for the gifted and talented, and this is where you would team together to ensure that you are providing the necessary needs that are typical within the actual school district. Because say for example a student moves out of district area and now they're in a new environment, well, they should be able to expect that they are going to gain the same services that they were previously provided. So it's super important that not only do you ensure that the specials at your school provide direct support to the talented and gifted student population, but also that you coordinate those enrichment services with other people that provide similar GATE services within the district. And that's easy to do as long as you, especially if you kind of like Google what GATE services are provided within Nevada, or if you are part of the team or you are getting certification, you'll be plugged in. All right, so pretty much is it. The reading was a little lengthy, but all in all, I think the SEM model is most effective in providing opportunity for students to develop their gifts and talents while they're in a inclusive setting. And it can be done systematically with the school if the proper procedures are set in place. Please feel free to email if you have any questions, and stay tuned for part 3 of this lecture.